Question for you. Have you ever experienced a moment of clarity or an aha moment that changed the way you did things from then on? I've experienced many of those moments in my business, but one of the most powerful ones was when I decided to focus on podcast management as my niche in my virtual assistant business. That single decision was a turning point in my life, essentially, and led to more fulfillment, profit, confidence, and structure in my business. The thing is, we're told all the time to niche down our businesses. I had heard it before, but I didn't really understand how powerful and true that was until I put it to practice in my own business. In today's episode, I'm going to share how niching down to podcast management transformed the way I approached my service-based work. If you've been thinking about niching down, and especially if you're considering podcast management, this episode is for you. Hey, you guys, welcome in. I'm so excited that you're here, and I'm excited to share a little bit about my story today with you. So if you've been a listener to the Support Squad podcast for a while, you've probably heard pieces of my story here or there, and I just kind of want to bring you up to speed a little bit. When I first started my virtual assistant business, as I've shared on the podcast before, I literally had no idea what I was doing. So I hopped onto the freelancing platform, Upwork.com, and I started just searching for jobs. And definitely at the beginning, it was just any job that I felt like I could do for any kind of client. And so I was just looking for basically any job description that I was like, I could probably do that. There was no real rhyme or reason to my strategy for offering my services or finding clients. Eventually, I landed my first client that I really connected with. She was a spiritual life coach, and I started to realize how much I really enjoyed working with her. I loved supporting her mission. I loved the kinds of content I was helping her create. And so I decided, okay, I'm starting to get this. Like, I can actually work for people that I really enjoy working with. I don't have to just take whatever comes my way. And so at first, I niched down my business, but I just niched it by my clients. I started realizing I wanted to serve spiritual entrepreneurs. And so that felt good. It made it easier for me to find clients because I had a little more focus and the kind of person I was looking for. The problem was I had still not niched my services. So for each of these four, I ended up with like four main clients that I served over the course of 3 or 4 years. And of those four clients at the beginning, I was doing everything for them. They were looking for someone that could help support them with everything. And I was like, okay, well, I can pretty much do anything. I was a pretty talented gal, not to brag, but I could pretty much do whatever my clients asked me to do. And so I was doing a lot of different things. I was managing people's inboxes. I was helping them onboard clients into their business. I was helping support their launches. I was running their affiliate programs, not to mention like all the content creation for social media and things like that. And then one day, one of my clients was like, hey, can you help me? I want to start a podcast. Can you help me launch my podcast? And I was like, sure, why not? I've never done it before, but I pretty much figured out I can learn how to do most things. So I supported her with launching and then managing her podcast. And it was like, bing, light bulb. I was like, holy cow, I love doing this. Like, podcasting is so fun. And so I also realized how powerful podcasting was. I started to see how bringing a podcast into my client's business transformed into like a strategy that went throughout her entire business. Basically, every piece of content we created for the podcast was related to her offers. And I started to see how podcasts can really be the foundation for a strong content marketing strategy. So I started to introduce this to my other clients. I'm like, hey, we've been blogging a lot. We've been creating videos here or there, but I think you showing up in like a podcast every week, us having that systemized process for creating content could really be valuable to your business. So before I knew it, all of my clients had podcasts that I was managing that I helped them launch. And so on top of being their kind of all-purpose virtual assistant, I was also now their podcast manager. So I loved the podcast management, and I actually still kind of enjoyed the other work I was doing for them, but it was really, really hard for me to find any kind of rhythm or structure to my day. And then in March of 2020, we all remember the pandemic hit. And before I knew it, my work time had been cut almost to nothing because my kids were now home with me. I was managing their virtual schooling. It was just me and my kids in our house every day. And I still had these 4 clients that I was managing their back ends of their business, doing all of these different things for them and managing their podcasts. So I started to think like, this isn't sustainable. I'm not going to be able to be in these people's inboxes every day. I'm not going to be able to provide that same level of consistent service that I have been. So how can I show up and serve my clients still in a way that isn't going to make us lack quality, where we're going to be able to be consistent? And I realized the only piece of that puzzle was podcast management. That was the only service that I felt confident about helping my clients with on a consistent basis. And we'll get more into this in a little bit, but the reason was because podcasting was so structured. Other things in their business, like managing their email or helping them with all of these different things, I couldn't plan for as much, but I knew if we were putting out a weekly podcast episode, I could carve out that little bit of space to keep that consistency for them. And I also found during the pandemic, my clients stepped back a lot of what they were doing too. But the one place that they didn't want to slack off, the one place where they wanted to continue to show up was in their podcast, because they'd seen the value of it. So even though I was kind of forced to finally niching down, I saw how powerful it was for me and my clients to have that kind of focus together. And so that's why I am excited to share even more about why I love podcast management. So let's get into this. Let's zoom out a little bit. Why podcast management? Why did I decide that that's what I wanted to do? Why did I find that fun? And so one thing is, like I was saying with my clients, I was so good at so many different things. And not only was I good at them and I could do them, but I really enjoyed having some diversity in my work, kind of doing lots of different things. I've always considered myself to be very creative, but I've found through my business that I really enjoy creating systems and structures and businesses. So I loved supporting my clients with that. I also loved being able to do all the creative stuff with them, helping them with social media, content creation. And my favorite thing was working with my clients on strategy, helping to figure out the next best steps in their business, what our next focus should be, how to align their content with their offers. And when I got into podcast management, I realized this is the thing that helps me combine all of these things. Because inside podcast management, I was able to use my tech skills to help them edit. I was able to use my project management skills to help them create systems and structure for producing the podcast. I was able to be creative, create graphics, audio graphics, all of that stuff. I was able to do it all as a podcast manager. And I realized I don't have to offer everything to everyone in order to use all of my skills. It can all be packaged up in a pretty little podcast package. So I was really excited to find that I finally figured out a specialty that used all of the things that I love to do. Another really beautiful thing happened when I niched to podcast management. My clients started referring me to their friends. Because here's the deal, if you have a specific ideal client, and then if you also have a specific specialty that you offer to those specific clients, guess what? Those clients all have friends within their industry. And if you've become their go-to girl for this one thing, I helped launch and manage my clients' podcast successfully. So when their friends were coming to them and being like, hey, I noticed you have a podcast. How's that going? I've been thinking of starting one. Who helped you with yours? It was really easy for my clients to be like, this girl over here, she's the one you need. And I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but referrals are actually one of the best ways to find high quality clients that value you. Because think about it. If we only find clients through job postings, what they're looking for is someone to just fill that role. They want to make sure that you're skilled. They want to make sure you can do the job, but they're not looking specifically for you. Whereas if you get a referral from somebody, that person knows that you are the one. Like, not only can you do the work, but you are the go-to girl for that work. And I loved that my clients were starting to see me as that and starting to talk about me to their friends and colleagues things in that way. And it became this really great way of bringing in new leads into my business, making new connections, and getting more entrenched in this industry that I already loved so much. So yeah, finding clients was great. Being able to more easily, market myself, that was awesome. But the absolute game changer for me when it came to podcast management was the structure it allowed me to bring to my business and to my daily, weekly, monthly life. Podcasts are pretty consistent. You launch a podcast, most podcasters are going to make it one of their top priority to put out a podcast episode every week. And the other thing I started to notice with my clients is that, yes, they wanted a podcast episode every week, but no, they didn't necessarily want to be recording a podcast episode every week. So me and my clients started thinking about how they could start to batch their episodes and start to really plan in advance what their content for a quarter would look like. And when we did that, I started to realize, wow, this is going to create so much space for me and so much space for them. Even when I think back to the way I would create content for clients before, where we'd have an idea for a blog, get it out, it was all kind of very loosey-goosey, let's say. Whereas podcasts, it's so structured. The process for every episode is exactly the same. You use the same systems and processes each time. You can really get into a rhythm. And I've definitely noticed with my own podcast for the last 2.5 years, it's the same every week. The format of the podcast is the same. The way I write the outlines is the same. The way they get published is the same. We use the same templates to create the marketing materials and things like that. So I just started to see how much space there was with podcast management to create real structure. And this allowed me stuff like being able to take this summer mostly off and things like that, because I was able to plan in advance. I could be like, all right, so I want to take a month off. I'll need 4 podcast episodes. How can I adjust my project plan to fit that in so that I can take a week out of office or something like that? And so I really started to see the power in the structure of podcasting. And I had never had that in my business before. So it was really eye-opening, life-changing, especially during the pandemic when we were all operating on less time, less resources, less energy, less mental capacity. I knew that with podcasting, I could so easily get into these systems and plug and play for each episode. I could still deliver high quality content to my clients without burning myself out or driving myself crazy. The other really beautiful transformation that happened as I niched into podcast management was my confidence just exploded, because I had spent so much time working with so many different clients on devising strategies for their podcast, creating back-end systems to support production. I was like, I know the ins and outs of this stuff. How sometimes they ask you that question, if you had to get up and speak for 30 minutes unprepared, what could you speak about? For me, I could talk about podcasting for hours on end with no preparation, because I had really learned the ins and outs of that. And I really started to notice a major shift that happened in the dynamic between me and my clients. Back when I was that all-purpose general VA doing all the things for them, it very much felt more like that employer-employee relationship. Whereas when I niched into podcast management, suddenly I was being seen more on the same level as my clients. They saw that they had their unique zones of genius, and I was operating in mine. I was able to support them and their goals. And so we were able to start to collaborate more together. They trusted me more. They had the confidence that I could deliver what they needed. And that just skyrocketed my confidence. Which leads me into my next point. Collaborating with these clients was one of the most rewarding things I've done, honestly, in my life. I was working with very inspiring, empowering women who were doing amazing work in the world. They had amazing messages to put out in their podcast. They were doing good stuff. And so for me, every week to sit down with my headphones on and listen to their words, hear their perspectives, learn new things from them, I found so much joy and fulfillment from that. I got into a rhythm with these, with doing the weekly podcast editing, where it was almost like going to class each week, but in a fun way. It didn't feel like work. support. It felt like I was learning from people that I already looked up to and respected and admired so much. So that's one really neat thing about podcast management is if you can find clients that are aligned with you, you're going to be constantly surrounding yourself with messaging that inspires you, educates you, uplifts you. And I definitely found that to be true in my business. I saw a ripple effect happen in my life because I was doing such positive work for such powerful, amazing people. It bled into my life in a good way. Instead of my work bleeding into my life in a stressful way, it was me immersed in the content of people that I really admired. And I learned so much from that. And then the other part that felt so fulfilling was finally reaching those time, freedom, and financial goals. I mean, even after a couple of years in my business, I was booked out with clients, which is a lot of our goal. And that first couple of years, we want to bring in clients. We want to get that little extra money, contribute to our household, or replace our 9-to-5 income, whatever that goal is. But I find that until I niched and specialized my business, I didn't really fully achieve those goals. I wasn't making as much as I could have made as a kind of all-purpose virtual assistant, and we'll talk more about that in next week's episode. Actually, is how much you might be losing out on if you're offering too many services. But by being able to package up my services in a more dynamic way, offer more high-value services, provide a complete transformation for my clients, and then have that structure in my life and in my relationships with my clients, finally, I was starting to see the money that I wanted to see, and I was starting to see the time freedom I wanted to see. And it took specializing my business to really make that happen. The other thing that I touched on a little bit earlier that I really saw a huge transformation in myself is just recognizing the power of podcasts as that foundational marketing tool for people. Podcasts are a very powerful thing when we get into it. They're such an intimate way to connect with people, and it's such a systemized way of creating content. So I started to see how much more structured and aligned my clients' marketing seemed because it was supported by this beautiful foundation of podcasting. And we know that podcasting can be a jumping off point and can provide content for so many things in a person's business. With a weekly podcast, now you have easily, 3 or 4 social media posts a week. You have a newsletter every week. You can have a blog every week, and it starts with podcasting as that foundation. So seeing that power of podcasting really inspired me in my own business, and it showed me how all of the different pieces of marketing can come together in a really amazing way, especially when we work with our clients to create strategic plans for creating that podcast content. So I learned so much about just marketing overall by being a podcast manager. So my intention of today's episode is not so much to tell you need to be a podcast manager, but to once again remind you guys, as I've done many times and will continue to do, that major transformations take place when you specialize and focus your business. If you haven't found that unique specialty for your business, you might really be not reaching the potential that you could be reaching. We hear all the time, you got to niche down, and I'm telling you right now, you really do. And I saw it in my own business. And now, now that I've transitioned more into coaching and teaching, I'm seeing those exact same transformations happen with my one-on-one clients. Everything changes when they find that focus. And I want the same for you too. So I hope today's episode kind of lit up your brain a little bit. If you had any thoughts during this episode, if any questions come up, I would love to hear if you started thinking about maybe I want to be a podcast manager, or maybe I do want to eliminate some of the extra services I'm doing. Keep me updated. Find me on Instagram at the Sharon Nissen. Leave me a comment on my most recent post and let me know, or send me a DM. Let me know what you thought of today's episode, what it lit up for you. I would love to have a conversation. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning into the Support Squad podcast. If you liked this episode, I'd love for you to leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. It's been a long time since I asked for that, but it makes me feel more connected to you, and it helps new folks find the podcast.